The police called me at 7:14 in the morning. I know the exact time because I was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with my hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had gone completely cold, staring out at the gray November water through the sliding glass door. The Atlantic looked like hammered pewter that morning, heavy, flat, mean. And my cat Chester, 17 years old and moving like he had gravel in his joints, was sitting on the windowsill watching the seagulls with the patient contempt only very old cats can manage. The detective's name was Reyes. She said, "Mrs. Calloway, we need you to come in." And the way she said it, not urgent, not alarmed, but careful, like she was handling something she didn't want to break, that's when I understood that whatever was happening was not the thing I had been afraid of the night before. It was something different, something I hadn't even thought to be scared of yet. But let me back up, because the night before that phone call is the part that matters. And to understand that night, you need to understand what 14 years looks like when it's slowly rotting from the inside, while you're too busy just trying to keep your head above water to notice the smell. My name is Nora. I'm 38 years old, and I am a barista. I've been a barista for 11 years, which is the kind of thing people say with a slight wince, like they're waiting for me to explain that I'm actually working on a screenplay or finishing my degree. I'm not. I make coffee. I make it extremely well. I work the opening shift at a place called Tidal Ground on the main strip of Carver Bay, which is a resort town on the North Carolina coast that swells to about 40,000 people every summer and shrinks back down to 9,000 every November. November is my favorite month here. The tourists are gone, the light gets low and golden in the afternoons, and the whole town exhales. The boardwalk empties out. You can hear the ocean again. I met Garrett Calloway at a Labor Day cookout 14 years ago. He was 31, I was 24, and he had the specific kind of easy confidence that I mistook for security. He was tall, broad-shouldered, worked in commercial real estate, and had a laugh that took over a room. His family had roots in Carver Bay going back 3 generations. His grandmother had owned a fish house on the pier. His mother, Diane, ran a short-term rental business on the island. He was local royalty in the way that only matters in small coastal towns. And when he started paying attention to me, a girl from inland Ohio who'd moved down here on a whim after a bad breakup, it felt like being chosen. We got married in the spring, small ceremony on the beach, just close friends and family. His sister Renata was his best person. That should have been a sign, honestly, not of what she was, but of how much space she already took up in his world. But I was 25 and in love and planning centerpieces, so I filed that detail away under cute and moved on. The house we lived in was technically Garrett's before we married, a 3-bedroom craftsman 2 blocks from the water. 7,000 square feet was not our house. That was the Calloway family property, a sprawling cedar-sided estate on the north end of the island that Garrett's parents had built in the late 90s. Garrett's father, Hank, had died 8 years ago and left the property to Garrett and Diane jointly, with the understanding that Diane would continue living there until she chose not to. It was the kind of arrangement that works fine on paper and quietly poisons everything in practice. Because Diane never stopped living there, and Renata came back to live with her 3 years ago after her second divorce. And that house sat between me and my husband like a gravitational pull I was never quite strong enough to counter. Let me tell you about my actual daily life, because I think that context matters. My alarm goes off at 4:45 a.m. Chester yells at me from the foot of the bed, which is his way of telling me he needs his thyroid medication, which he takes crushed into a small spoonful of wet food, which he then eats around with surgical precision, leaving the medicated portion perfectly intact in the center of the dish, every single morning. I re-crush it into a different food. He eats around it again. We have been doing this for 2 years since his diagnosis, and I have never once won. I gave up trying. I just sit there in the dark kitchen, watching him execute his tiny daily act of defiance, and I feel something close to love, so fierce it makes my chest hurt. I'm at Tidal Ground by 5:30. The walk is 12 minutes. In November, it's dark and cold, and the wind off the water cuts straight through whatever I'm wearing, and I have never minded it. Not once. There's something about being one of the only people awake in a sleeping town that makes me feel like I'm in on a secret. I unlock the shop, start the machines, prep the pastry case, and by the time my coworker Deja arrives at 6, the whole place smells like espresso and warm butter, and the day feels manageable. Garrett rarely woke up before 8. He worked from home most days, which in practice meant he took calls in his office until noon and then drove to his mother's house for lunch and came back around 4, smelling like Diane's cooking and with whatever opinions Renata had sent him home with already fully installed in his head. I noticed this pattern gradually, then I noticed it constantly. Then I stopped mentioning it, because mentioning it always ended the same way. Garrett looking at me with that particular brand of patient exhaustion, like I was being unreasonable in some way that was beneath him to fully articulate. "They're my family, Nora," he'd say. Just that. As if it were an explanation complete enough to close any conversation. Renata and I had never been close, but for the first several years we'd managed a kind of functional cordiality. Holidays, family dinners, occasional texts about logistics. She was 2 years younger than Garrett, sharp-tongued, and had opinions about everything. My job, my hair, the way I'd rearranged the living room furniture, the fact that Chester slept on the bed. "Cat hair everywhere," she'd said once, standing in my doorway and looking at the duvet with open disapproval. "I don't know how you stand it." I'd smiled and said something non-committal, and later that night I'd pulled Chester up onto my chest and held him there while he purred and thought, at least one of us is exactly where he belongs. The shift in Renata happened slowly and then all at once, the way erosion does. About 2 years ago, she started showing up at the house more. Not invited, just appearing. Sometimes she'd let herself in with the spare key Garrett had given her, that he had given her without telling me, I found out later. And she'd be sitting at my kitchen table when I came home from a closing shift, drinking my coffee, scrolling her phone. "Garrett said it was fine," she'd tell me, and Garrett would nod from across the room in a way that made it clear he had said it was fine, and also that my having feelings about this made me difficult. I want to be honest, I wasn't happy. I hadn't been fully happy for maybe 4 years, but I was managing. I was building things, a small life, a good reputation at work, a loyal set of regulars who came in every morning and knew my name, and whose orders I had memorized. I had Chester, who was ancient and opinionated and entirely mine. I had the walk to work in the dark, and the way the first espresso shot of the day looked pulling into the cup, and the satisfaction of a thing done well, repeatedly, without anyone having to tell you you're doing it right. I thought that was enough. I thought endurance was a form of love. 14 years is a long time to be wrong about something. The night of November 12th started completely ordinarily. I worked a full 8-hour shift, came home at 2 in the afternoon, made a sandwich I didn't really taste, and watched half a documentary about deep-sea fish before falling asleep on the couch with Chester draped across my shins. Garrett came in around 6, kissed my forehead in that absent way he had, and said Renata was joining us for dinner. She arrived at 7 with a bottle of wine she didn't offer to share and a stack of papers she set on the kitchen counter with the casual authority of someone who has already decided how a conversation is going to end. "I wanted to go over some things about the North property," she said, not looking at me. We'd been through this before. The North property, the big cedar house, had been a source of low-level friction for years. Garrett and Diane owned it jointly, and Diane was 81 now, and her health had been declining since the spring. Renata had power of attorney for Diane, a fact she mentioned with the frequency and precision of someone who understood exactly what power it conferred. There had been talk of selling the property or restructuring the ownership, and each time it came up, I sat at my own kitchen table and watched my husband defer to his sister with the eager compliance of someone who has never learned to say no to her. That night, Renata pushed a document across the table toward Garrett. "Mom needs this notarized and filed before the end of the month, just a formality." I glanced at it. I'm not a lawyer, but I've lived in a house with a real estate professional for 14 years, and I've picked up enough to read a property document at a glance. What I saw made me pause. The document appeared to be a deed amendment. It listed Garrett as the sole owner of the North property, with a note about the removal of a co-owner encumbrance. I didn't understand all of it, but I understood enough to ask, is that Diane signing over her half? Renata looked at me like I'd asked what color the sky was. It's an estate planning measure. It simplifies things. Does Diane understand what she's signing? The look Renata gave me then was different. Not dismissive, something colder. Nora, she said very evenly, this is a family matter. Garrett said nothing. He picked up the pen Renata had placed on top of the document, and I watched my husband, without reading a single line of that paperwork, sign his name at the bottom of the page. I went to bed early that night. I told Garrett I had a headache, which was true. Chester settled in beside me, his warm weight against my ribs, his breathing slow and rattly with age, and I lay there in the dark, listening to the wind off the ocean and the low murmur of Garrett and Renata talking in the kitchen below. I don't know when I fell asleep. I know it was well before midnight because when I woke to use the bathroom and glanced at the clock on the nightstand, it read 12:47 a.m. I didn't turn any lights on. The hallway was dark, but there was a stripe of light under Garrett's office door, and his voice, low and careful, carrying through the old craftsman walls in the way sound does in houses that were built before insulation was a serious consideration. I almost kept walking. I almost just went to the bathroom and came back to bed and fed Chester his medication and went to work at 4:45 and lived the rest of my life in the particular comfortable numbness I had constructed over 14 years. Instead, I stood in the hallway in my socks and I listened. "Don't worry, sweetheart," Garrett was saying. His voice had a texture I didn't recognize, soft and certain, the way it used to sound when he talked to me years ago. "Tomorrow she disappears, and this 7,000-square-foot place is all yours." A pause, then his low laugh. I know. It's been a long time coming. Everything's already in motion. She won't see it coming." My hand found the wall. I stood there for what was probably 30 seconds and felt like 30 years. Chester appeared from the bedroom doorway and wound around my ankles, looking up at me with his wide, pale eyes, and I reached down and picked him up and held him against my chest because he was warm and real, and I needed something that was both of those things. My heart was doing something strange, not racing, not pounding, but beating in a slow, heavy, deliberate way, like it was choosing each beat carefully. I went back to the bedroom. I set Chester on the bed. I sat down beside him in the dark, and I thought about that document on the kitchen table, about Renata's cold eyes, about Garrett signing without reading, about the words, "She won't see it coming." I did not sleep again that night, and at 7:14 in the morning, Detective Reyes called. Detective Reyes didn't tell me much on the phone. She said there had been an incident at the North property, the Cedar House on the north end of the island, and that she needed me to come in and answer some questions. She used the word incident twice. She did not use the word Garrett. I noticed that. I fed Chester his medication. He ate around it. I recrushed it. He ate around it again. I sat there in the kitchen watching him perform his tiny act of rebellion, and I thought, very clearly and without panic, I need to call someone before I walk into that police station. I need to call someone who knows what I know. The someone I called was Deja. I know that sounds strange. Deja is my coworker. She's 26, has opinions about everything, and has been telling me for 2 years that I should leave Garrett. She has also, as it turns out, a cousin who is a family law attorney in Wilmington. Her name is Simone Archer, and I had her number on my phone within 4 minutes of calling Deja, which is the kind of efficiency that comes from someone who was already halfway expecting this call. "Tell me everything," Simone said when I reached her. "Quickly." I told her about the phone call, about the document on the kitchen table, about what I'd heard through the office door at 12:47 a.m. She listened without interrupting, which is either the sign of a very good attorney or a very alarmed one, possibly both. "Do not go into that station without me," she said. "Give me 90 minutes. I gave her 90 minutes. I spent them at my kitchen table, not drinking coffee, just sitting with Chester in my lap and thinking about 14 years. About the specific way Garrett had picked up that pen without reading a single line of the document Renata placed in front of him. About his voice through the office wall, soft and certain. She won't see it coming. The thing is, and I've thought about this a lot since, I wasn't afraid. I should have been afraid. A woman overhears her husband telling someone she's going to disappear, and then the police call before breakfast. That is, objectively, a terrifying sequence of events. But I wasn't afraid. I was something colder than afraid. I was paying attention in a way I hadn't paid attention to anything in years. Simone met me in the parking lot of the Carver Bay Police Department at 9:20 a.m. She was 40, compact, in a gray wool coat, and she shook my hand with the kind of grip that tells you immediately that this person does not waste time. "Before we go in," she said, "I need to know one thing. The property document you saw last night, did you take a photo of it?" I had not. She nodded like she'd expected that. "Okay, it's fine. We work with what we have." Detective Reyes was waiting for us in a small conference room that smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet. She was in her mid-40s, dark-haired, with the careful eyes of someone who has learned to watch what people do with their hands when they talk. She offered water. I took it. Simone did not. "Mrs. Calloway," Detective Reyes said, "thank you for coming in. I want to be straightforward with you. Last night at approximately 1:15 a.m., your husband Garrett Calloway was taken into custody." The room was very quiet. "Taken into custody for what?" Simone said. "We received an anonymous tip at 12:58 a.m. reporting a disturbance at the North property on Inlet Drive. When officers arrived, they found Mr. Calloway on the premises with another individual." She paused. "The property was in the process of being staged, furniture moved, personal items belonging to the current resident, Diane Calloway, had been packed and placed in a rented moving truck parked in the driveway." I heard myself say, "Diane was there?" Diane Calloway was not at the property. She is currently residing at a memory care facility in Beaufort, has been for approximately 6 weeks. Something in my chest went very still. "The individual found with your husband," Reyes continued, "was a woman named Cassandra Pruitt. She had a key to the property and was directing the staging. She also had, in her possession, a copy of a deed amendment listing herself as a beneficiary of the property in the event of your husband's sole ownership." Simone's hand moved to the legal pad in front of her. I watched her write something. "The document your husband signed last night," I said. "What was it actually?" Reyes looked at me steadily. "We're still working through that with our property crimes unit, but preliminary review suggests it was not a legitimate estate planning document. It appears to have been structured to remove Diane Calloway's co-ownership interest under a power of attorney that may have been executed without her informed consent." She paused. "Renata Calloway is also being questioned." There it was, the cold, clean shape of it, finally visible. "My mother-in-law," I said. "Does she know?" "We have someone with her in Beaufort. She's—" Reyes stopped, chose her words. "She's distressed, but coherent." I thought about Diane, 81 years old, her fish house husband, 3 generations in Carver Bay, her cedar house on the north end of the island that she'd watched her children grow up in. The idea of her sitting in a memory care facility in Beaufort while her son and his mistress packed her belongings into a moving truck at 1 in the morning made something rise in my throat that I had to swallow back down very deliberately. "What happens now?" Simone asked. "Mr. Calloway is being held pending a bail hearing this afternoon. Charges are still being determined. We're looking at elder financial abuse, fraud, potentially conspiracy. Your client is not under any suspicion. We called her in as a witness and because, frankly, her name appears on a secondary document we found at the property." Reyes slid a paper across the table. "This is a waiver of marital property rights. It appears to have been prepared for your signature. It was not signed." I looked at it. My name was already typed at the bottom. There was a line waiting for my signature and a notary block, empty. A document that would have stripped me of any claim to the Craftsman house, the joint accounts, everything we'd built in 14 years, ready and waiting for a moment when I might have been persuaded or pressured or simply disappeared, in whatever way Garrett had meant that word, into signing away everything. "He was going to have me sign this," I said, not a question. "That's what we're trying to determine," Reyes said. "Do you have anything you'd like to tell us about the events of last night?" And I did. I told her everything. The document at the kitchen table, the pen Garrett picked up without reading, the voice through the office wall at 12:47 a.m., and the exact words I had heard. "Don't worry, sweetheart. Tomorrow she disappears, and this 7,000 square foot place is all yours." I told her about the spare key Renata had been given without my knowledge, about the pattern of Renata appearing in my house, at my table, with papers that needed signing and conversations that needed to end in a particular direction. I told her about the way Garrett had, for years, said, "They're my family, Nora," as if that sentence explained everything and absolved everyone. Reyes took notes. Her handwriting was small and very even. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mrs. Calloway, I want to ask you something, and you don't have to answer. Did you know, at any point, that there was another woman?" I thought about that voice through the wall, the texture of it, soft and certain in a way it hadn't been with me in years. "I knew something was gone," I said. "I didn't know where it went." She nodded slowly, like that answer was the one she'd expected, and the one that made her saddest. The bail hearing happened that afternoon. Garrett's bail was set at $75,000. He made it. His mother's attorney posted it, the same attorney, I later found out, who had drafted the legitimate version of Diane's estate documents 18 months earlier, and who was now, with considerable urgency, reviewing everything Renata had produced in the interim. Cassandra Pruitt was released on her own recognizance. She was 29, a real estate agent from Wilmington, and she and Garrett had apparently been together for 3 years. 3 years. Chester was diagnosed with his thyroid condition 2 years ago, and I have spent every single morning since then, sitting in the dark, re-crushing his medication into different foods. I did that math in the parking lot of the police station, and stood there for a moment with the November wind off the water cutting straight through my jacket, just letting myself feel the full weight of it. Then I got in my car, and I drove. Simone filed for divorce on my behalf 11 days later. Because we had been married 14 years, and because Garrett's name was on the Craftsman house before our marriage, but marital funds had been used for every renovation and mortgage payment since, the division was not simple. It was also not, in the end, as devastating as the document waiting for my signature would have made it. Simone was very good at her job. She was also, I suspected, personally invested in making Renata's particular brand of damage visible in every filing. The elder financial abuse charges against Garrett and Renata were serious. Diane had been placed in the memory care facility without a full family discussion, and the power of attorney Renata had been wielding so confidently had been executed during a period when Diane's cognitive assessment records showed significant impairment. Diane's own attorney, the legitimate one, had those records. The deed amendment Garrett had signed at my kitchen table was voided. The North property remained in Diane's estate. Cassandra Pruitt gave a statement to police that she had believed Garrett was legally separated and that the property transfer was entirely above board. I don't know if I believe that, but it's what she said, and ultimately she wasn't charged with anything, and I have spent enough of my life thinking about Cassandra Pruitt. I'm done with that now. The Craftsman house sold in February. We split the equity. My share was $214,000, which is the most money I have ever held in my name alone in my entire life. I put $8,000 of it toward a security deposit and first month's rent on an apartment 4 blocks from Tidal Ground, on the second floor of a building that faces east, so the morning light comes in at an angle that makes the whole place look warmer than it is. The rest went into an account Simone helped me set up. Just mine, just my name, just my money, accumulating interest and existing in the world without anyone else's signature required for anything. I took Chester to the vet the week I moved in. His numbers were better than they'd been in 6 months. The vet said he was remarkably stable for his age. I sat in the exam room holding him on the paper-covered table while he expressed his opinion of the situation in a long, irritated rumble, and I thought, Yeah, me too, buddy. Me too. The thing I keep coming back to, and I've talked about this with Deja, with Simone, with the therapist I started seeing in January, whose name is Dr. Vasquez, and who has the useful habit of waiting out my silences until I figure out what I actually mean, is that I wasn't destroyed. I thought I would be. I had spent years in a low-grade terror of this exact kind of unraveling, the thing where you find out the foundation was hollow the whole time. I thought finding out would be like falling through the floor, but it wasn't. It was more like stepping off a porch I hadn't realized was rotted, uncomfortable, disorienting. And then I was just standing on the ground, which had been there the whole time, solid and cold and real. I still work the opening shift at Tidal Ground. My alarm still goes off at 4:45 a.m. The walk is still 12 minutes, and in November, the wind still cuts straight through whatever I'm wearing, and I still don't mind it. The town still exhales when the tourists leave. The boardwalk empties. You can hear the ocean. Some things changed. I learned in the months since all of it that I am considerably less fragile than 14 years of someone's patient exhaustion had led me to believe. I learned that the comfortable numbness I had been living in was not peace. It was just the absence of anything loud enough to make me move. I learned that Deja, who is 26 and has opinions about everything, is one of the best friends I have ever had, and that I had been too inside my own careful life to see it clearly before. Chester turned 18 in March. I had a small celebration. Just me, him, a can of the expensive food he likes, and the morning light coming in at its particular angle across the kitchen floor. He ate around his medication with his usual surgical precision, and I sat there watching him and I laughed, actually laughed out loud, in my own apartment, in my own morning, on my own time. The last thing I heard about Garrett was that he and Renata were both awaiting trial and that he had moved in with a friend in Wilmington. Cassandra Pruitt had, according to Deja's cousin's professional network, which is apparently quite thorough, terminated their relationship sometime around his arraignment. I don't feel satisfied by that exactly. I don't feel vindicated in the way I thought I might. What I feel is something quieter and harder to name. Something like the sensation of a sound you've been hearing for so long you stop noticing it, finally going silent. 14 years, a lot of mornings, a lot of cold coffee and absent kisses and conversations that ended before they started, a lot of standing in the hallway in my socks, almost keeping walking, almost choosing not to hear. I heard. That's the part that mattered. At 12:47 in the morning, in a house that was rotting from the inside, I stopped walking and I listened. And everything that came after, the detective's careful voice, Simone's grip in the parking lot, the $214,000 sitting in an account that belongs to no one but me, the morning light in my east-facing apartment, Chester executing his daily act of defiance against a medication he will never willingly eat. All of it started in that 30-second moment in the dark when I chose, finally, to pay attention. Some women disappear when their husbands say they will. I just decided not to be one of them.